You know, that feeling when a story seems simple at first, but the more you look, well, the more complicated it gets.
Mm-hmm.
The origin of COVID-19 feels like a perfect example.
Mm.
We were initially told, it came from an animal in a Wuhan wet market.
Right. That was the initial narrative.
Case closed, right.
Huh.
But then you start seeing different pieces of information, new questions popping up, and suddenly that initial picture doesn't seem quite so clear anymore.
Exactly. And that's really what we're going to explore today. You shared some fascinating material with us, a really direct piece that lays out several points of concern, developments that have seriously challenged that early consensus.
Yeah.
It's less about definitive answers at this stage, I think, and more about understanding why so many questions are still being asked.
Right. So for you listening, our aim here is to really dig into this source and pull out the core arguments. What are the key reasons people are questioning the original explanation? What are the specific lines of inquiry that suggest, there might be more to this story? We want to give you a solid grasp of the complexities without getting lost in, like, technical jargon or wild speculation.
Yeah, grounded in the information presented.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The source starts by looking at that initial idea, the natural spillover. What's the first thing that makes it seem, well, unusual?
So the source points to something called the unusual singularity.
Singularity, okay.
Now, what makes this particularly noteworthy and what scientists often look for in natural virus jumps from animals to humans are genetic stepping stones in the animal population.
Right, like links in a chain.
Exactly. We'd typically expect to see the virus evolving in a host animal, maybe different versions making the jump across to people over time.
Right.
The fact that all early known COVID-19 cases seem to trace back to just one single introduction point without clear evidence of those intermediary animal versions, especially in the early stages, that's a key part of this singularity argument.
So it's like,
It's a bit like a finished product suddenly appearing without the usual assembly line,
that's a great way to put it, like the virus just showed up fully formed in humans. Yeah, okay. Then the source moves on to another intriguing point. Reports of researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology
Mm-hmm.
showing COVID-like symptoms way back in the fall of 2019, well before the virus was widely known.
Yes, and when we consider the timeline, it certainly prompts further investigation. These reports predate the widespread awareness of this new coronavirus.
Right, way before anyone was really talking about it.
Now, of course, it's vital to remember that experiencing similar symptoms doesn't automatically mean it was COVID-19. Lots of things cause flu-like symptoms.
Sure.
But the proximity of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a major research center working specifically with coronaviruses,
Right there in Wuhan.
right there, coupled with these early reports of illness among its researchers, well, there are definitely pieces of the puzzle that continue to be examined.
Which leads naturally to the third suspicious thing the source brings up. The type of research happening at the Wuhan lab. Specifically, gain-of-function research.
Mm-hmm.
For you listening, maybe just quickly explain that. It sounds kind of sci-fi.
Well, yeah, it can sound that way.
Hmm.
But basically, imagine scientists taking a virus and tweaking it, maybe to make it more contagious or more severe, or maybe just to understand how it might evolve in the future.
Or they're trying to see what it could do.
Exactly. The goal is often to get ahead of potential natural threats to develop countermeasures, but it inherently involves working with potentially dangerous pathogens.
And the source raises questions about whether the safety measures, the biosafety levels at the Wuhan lab, were adequate for this kind of work.
This is a really critical aspect of the discussion. Gain-of-function research, while potentially offering valuable insights for, understanding and preparing for future pandemics, naturally involves risks.
Right.
The source highlights the ongoing debate about whether the biosafety protocols at the Wuhan Institute of Virology were robust enough for the specific types of experiments they were conducting. It's a complex issue, definitely, with strong arguments on both sides about the necessity versus the potential danger.
Okay. Then the source mentions a specific scientific paper, the proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2. Now, if I remember correctly, that paper concluded pretty strongly that the virus most likely had a natural origin, right?
That's correct. It was a very influential paper early on.
But then the source adds this layer of complexity, mentioning Dr. Fauci's involvement in getting that paper published. Why is that significant in this context?
Well, Dr. Fauci, as a leading and, highly respected voice in infectious disease research globally, held a position of significant influence.
Huge influence.
Therefore, his involvement in the publication of a paper like Proximal Origin, Well, it could have potentially shaped the early scientific consensus.
Also.
Perhaps influence the direction of subsequent research, maybe even funding priorities. The source suggests that this level of influence warrants closer scrutiny, just to understand if there are any potential biases, conscious or unconscious, at play in those initial assessments of the virus's origin.
Got it. So sort of questioning the narrative formation early on. Okay, so these are some of the initial challenges to the natural origin theory laid out in the source. Then it introduces another key player, EcoHealth Alliance,
Mm-hmm.
and its president, Dr. Peter Daszak. What's their role in this whole picture?
So EcoHealth Alliance is a nonprofit organization, and they provided funding specifically for bat coronavirus research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Okay, so they were funding the lab we were just talking about.
Yes, and what's particularly noteworthy, as the source points out, is that this research included gain-of-function experiments, and it was supported, at least in part, by U.S. taxpayer dollars.
U.S. taxpayer money going to gain-of-function research in Wuhan via this group.
Correct, and this immediately raises questions about, well, the oversight and the accountability mechanisms in place for funding potentially risky research, especially when it's conducted in other countries.
And when investigations into the virus origins actually began, the source indicates that EcoHealth Alliance wasn't entirely cooperative. Is that fair?
That's right. Allegations have surfaced suggesting that EcoHealth Alliance may have hindered investigations, perhaps by not being fully transparent or by withholding certain information or records.
And that lack of transparency.
Well, it understandably fueled further suspicion and led to calls for more comprehensive access to data and research records related to their work. What exactly was funded, what were the results.
And it got serious, right? The source even mentions the U.S. government initiated debarment proceedings against EcoHealth, and the Department of Justice is investigating them.
It is significant, yes. Debarment by the U.S. government essentially means they are prohibited from receiving federal funding.
That's a big deal for an organization like that.
It's a very big deal. The fact that such actions were taken alongside a Department of Justice investigation really underscores the gravity of the concerns surrounding EcoHealth Alliance's involvement and their level of cooperation with official inquiries.
This whole situation seems to highlight potential gaps in oversight, maybe higher up. The source points to the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, and suggests there was a lack of, let's say, robust oversight regarding the research they were funding through groups like EcoHealth.
This is a crucial point to consider systemically. If we connect this to the broader system, it really raises questions about the effectiveness of the mechanisms designed to oversee and manage the potential risks associated with federally funded research.
Especially risky research.
Particularly when that research involves potentially dangerous pathogens and is conducted internationally, adding layers of complexity.
Then the source brings in another individual, Dr. David Morens, described as a senior advisor to Dr. Fauci, and it details some pretty serious accusations against him, including allegedly deleting federal COVID records.
Yeah.
And lying to Congress. Those are significant allegations.
They are indeed very significant. The alleged deletion of federal records and providing false testimony to Congress would, if proven, constitute major misconduct by a senior government official.
Absolutely.
And the claim that he also shared non-public information with Dr. Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance, that further intensifies concerns about potential conflicts of interest and the integrity of the information being shared with investigators and the public.
Right, sharing inside info with the guy whose organization is under scrutiny.
Precisely.
And it doesn't stop there. The source also suggests that the Biden administration's Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, has been, quote, stonewalling investigations and withholding key documents.
These are serious allegations that, if substantiated, would indicate a potential pattern of obstruction and a lack of transparency at multiple levels of government.
Which just fuels more questions.
Exactly. The withholding of information and the alleged hindering of investigations would naturally lead to questions about what might be being concealed and, frankly, the reasons behind such actions.
Okay, so the source lays out these points related to the origin investigation itself, the lab, the funding, the oversight. Then it shifts a bit to touch on some wider concerns related to the pandemic response itself.
Broadening the scope.
Starting with the controversy around Governor Cuomo's policy in New York regarding sending COVID-positive patients back to nursing homes. And the subsequent accusations of a data cover-up there.
Yes, that was a deeply concerning situation in New York. And the subsequent allegations of data manipulation really underscore the immense pressures and incredibly difficult decisions faced by policymakers during the heat of the pandemic.
For sure.
It also highlights the critical importance of transparency and accountability and how governments respond to public health crises and how they report the resulting data, especially when it involves vulnerable populations.
It also briefly mentions the criticisms leveled at the World Health Organization, the WHO.
Right.
Specifically, its alleged deference to the Chinese government, particularly in the initial stages of the pandemic. And it also notes the ongoing discussions around a potential global pandemic treaty.
The WHO's initial response and its relationship with China have certainly been subjects of considerable debate.
Yeah, a lot of scrutiny there.
And the proposed pandemic treaty aims to establish a framework for, improved international cooperation in future pandemics. But it has also generated discussion and some criticism regarding its potential implications for national sovereignty and the extent of the WHO's authority.
Then there's the rather perplexing issue of the 6 feet apart social distancing rule,
Yeah.
with Dr. Fauci reportedly saying it, quote, just sort of appeared. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence in the scientific basis, does it?
No, that particular statement did raise questions for many people. The lack of a clear, easily cited evidence-based origin for such a widely implemented and impactful public health measure, well, it understandably contributed to public uncertainty.
Yeah, if the experts don't know where it came from.
It highlighted the challenges of communicating evolving scientific understanding during a fast-moving crisis.
And the source also touches on the shifting, sometimes contradictory guidance on mask mandates and the perceived lack of definitive evidence supporting them consistently throughout the pandemic.
The evolving recommendations on mask mandates throughout the pandemic reflected the developing understanding of the virus itself and the effectiveness of different interventions over time.
Sure, science evolves.
But the perception of inconsistent messaging and, at times, a lack of clear, unambiguous scientific consensus definitely contributed to public confusion and, for some, skepticism.
The source also briefly points to the huge economic and mental health consequences of the lockdowns.
Which were undeniable.
Absolutely. As well as the allegations, and these are allegations of government collaboration with social media platforms to potentially censor dissenting voices regarding the pandemic narrative.
These are really important considerations when we look back at the overall impact of the pandemic response. Lockdowns had profound, far-reaching social and economic consequences. We're still feeling them.
Wow.
And the allegations of government involvement in moderating or censoring certain viewpoints online raise significant concerns about freedom of expression and the open exchange of information, especially during a public health emergency.
So bringing all of this together now, all these different threads from the source material, what's the key things for you, the listener, to take away from this overview?
Well, when we synthesize this information, it does paint a picture of what the source describes as potentially serious missteps by public health officials and institutions.
Okay.
The accumulation of these various points, the unusual way the virus seemed to emerge, the specific research at the Wuhan lab, the funding issues, and alleged lack of cooperation from EcoHealth Alliance, the questions surrounding oversight, and then these broader pandemic response concerns.
Right.
Collectively, they suggest that the possibility of a lab-related incident is a hypothesis that, deserves continued and thorough investigation. It can't just be dismissed out of hand based on this collection of points.
And importantly, as the source emphasizes, regardless of where you ultimately believe the virus originated, natural spillover, lab leak, something else.
Right.
The fundamental issue here, according to the source, is the pursuit of the truth, whatever that may be.
Precisely. Regardless of the final determination on the origin, if we ever get one definitively, the information we've discussed raises significant and, I think, legitimate questions. Questions about the robustness of research oversight, about the transparency of scientific and governmental processes, and about decision-making within public health during a major crisis.
And that seems crucial going forward.
Absolutely. This is crucial information for you to consider as you navigate future discussions and information related to public health, scientific research, and how we prepare for the next one.
So, okay, here's a final thought maybe for you to consider. If the full truth about the origin of COVID-19 remains unknown, or perhaps unacknowledged, what are the potential long-term consequences? Consequences for our preparedness for future pandemics, and maybe just as importantly, for the public's trust in the institutions meant to protect them. It really makes you think about the systems we have in place, doesn't it? and whether they are truly adequate for these kinds of global challenges.
It certainly does. And encouraging that kind of critical thinking about these fundamental systems and processes is perhaps one of the most valuable outcomes of exploring this complex and clearly still ongoing issue.